I will start with two slightly strange anecdotes and observations. Firstly, a few years back, the library was giving out outdated books, and I came across an old book from the late 1960s, early 70s that dealt with photography. The book was called The Pictorial Cyclopedia of Photography. The battered book starts with the following words, quote, "The Pictorial Cyclopedia of Photography will answer all the questions any photographer is likely to encounter." It's quite a nice promise. Well, after the intimidating certitude of these opening lines, the book does indeed address an enormous amount of related issues about photography, including detailed instructions on how to successfully photograph horses, for example here, dogs and puppies, trees, sports, children, the seaside, nudes, abstraction, portraits, etc. The book includes also many impressive details and charts about photographic chemistry and equipment, and many still, I think, valid technical tips and tricks on producing good photographic prints. All the relevant categories of knowledge are arranged for us to see in this book. All the possible uses of photography are exposed and covered. And the alphabetical ordering makes sure that things like chlorine paper, chromatic aberration, churches, and cats appear conveniently one next to the other. My second observation comes from the field of photography theory. Over the years, I have been struck by the fact that many of the theorists whose work I value greatly and who sometimes have been writing about different aspects of photography for decades, often in the more senior stages of their career, start to publish books and articles and curate exhibitions which might have titles like "What Photography Is," "What is a Photograph?" "Why Photography Matters," "Why Photography Matters as Art as Never Before," etc. And even if the titles do not pose the question quite as blatantly as that, it seems to me that many of us are drawn to ask what might seem like a simple question. What kind of a being, event, or relation is the thing that we call photography? We find ourselves unarmed and slightly helpless, returning to the same ontological question about a photograph's being. I presented these two brief anecdotes and superimposed them, to use a photographic term, superimposed them for you, not to smirk at or belittle that old book that now seems amusingly outdated, or to state that in their later years, photographic theorists tend to regress in their thinking, which I surely hope is not the case for personal reasons, but to expose a fundamental tension within photography research, the one between the uses of photography, which is their application and context, versus the photograph's ontological identity. Regarding the uses, there today, of course, exist many more guides, like the Cyclopedia was back in the day, teaching about how to use photography in different ways. Nowadays, they are on the internet as YouTube tutorials or have become integrated into the camera's program, where we can find different settings for things like landscapes or portraits. The same or similar conventions as 50 years before still exist, but may be slightly developed. Then I wanted to remind that photography is an enormously large field where there are not only rapid technological advances, but ones which enable the constant development of a wide range of social uses and everyday applications. Photographic images permeate our lives. Our environment is full of cameras, including surveillance cameras and those speed traps for cars we have on the Kehä 1 road. And the relation between our bodies, images, and media has become more and more convoluted. The change has been rapid. We cannot imagine this world of our lives without photography. Not so long ago, it would not have been safe to assume that each and every one of you here in this room would have a camera in your pocket, as I now think you do. Is there anyone here who does not have a phone with a camera? I can't see anyone raise their hand, so I suppose not. And my third reason for this comparison was to remind that it is still just as necessary, or has become maybe even more so, to constantly reevaluate and re-examine the very fundamentals of photography as they are now, in this present time. The ontological curiosity persists, although intertwined with our other curiosities about photography's uses. We have to remember that the history of photography is not very long, only 200 years or so. So even the time between the publishing of the pictorial cyclopedia, for example, which I showed to you about 50 years ago, or let us say roughly the length of my life, accounts for 1/4 of the length of photography's history. But it is not a history that has only one line progressing forward. As writes Kaja Silverman, one of those theoreticians who have recently wanted to think anew the ontological identity of photography, she writes, "Photography isn't a medium that was invented by 3 or 4 men in the 1820s and 1830s, that was improved in numerous ways over the following century, and that has now been replaced by computational images. It is rather the world's primary way of revealing itself to us, of demonstrating that it exists, and that it will forever exceed us. Photography is also an ontological calling card. It helps us to see that each of us is a node in a vast constellation of analogies." The italics is mine. The world's primary way of revealing itself to us. What Silverman so eloquently states in her book has particular relevance, I think, to photography research as it is conducted here at Aalto University, as we are not only dealing with the study of photographs, but with educating practicing photographers and photographic artists to be researchers. And I think that it is the thinking embedded in the photographs and of the photographers that we especially need to tap into. Because as photographers, we have direct access to a world's primary way of revealing itself to us, to use Silverman's words. In fact, one of the original reasons for me becoming interested in photographic research was the observation I made when still an MA student of photography, that there was much thinking that went into the photographic work from myself and my fellow students, which did not have the suitable equivalence in words. An appropriate language did not exist. I did my doctoral work over 15 years ago, chasing that thinking, exploring the photographic image as an event, and I feel that I'm still today on that very same path. Now I have revealed my particular bias or focus within the field of photography research. Now you can maybe also see that the word art in my title, The Art of Photography Research, does not refer only to the various research skills necessary, but stresses art literally, how artistic practice is and can be part of photography research. The field of artistic research is still young, even if in the past 2 decades there has been a tremendous increase in academic programs, conferences, collaborations, and peer-reviewed publication venues. Personally, I think that the field is in a very opportune place right now. On the one hand, artistic research needs not fight as harshly for living space and legitimation, or to mirror itself against the research practices of more established traditions. And on the other, there do not yet exist conventions that would be far too stifling. This means that we are ready to genuinely reassess what we mean by research, and I do not mean reassess artistic research here, but research in general. Social anthropologist Tim Ingold has recently written how artistic research can bring us back to the origins of research as the act of searching again and again. Research in this sense, according to Ingold, is a process of care, curiosity, and attention that seeks towards the truths that always exceed data and knowledge captured in facts and brings about a novel kind of correspondence with the things in this world, a new capacity for observation. Ingold writes, "To many it seems that in this era of post-truth we are cast adrift without an anchor. We are right to insist that there can be no proper facts without observation. But we are wrong, I believe, to confuse observation with objectivity. For to observe, it is not enough merely to look at things. We have to join with them and to follow. And it is precisely as observation goes beyond objectivity that truth goes beyond the facts." To me, looking from the perspective of photography research, it is easy to take Ingold's invitation to heart. For what other field than photography is as immersed in the practices of observing this world? Ingold speaks of a return to the origins of research as searching again, but I think that we are also returning to the origins of theory, remembering the etymology of the Greek word theoria, which is to look at and to contemplate. Who looks at and contemplates more than a photographer? Then a few things to wrap up, no pun intended. I realized that in my talk today I can hardly claim, like the Cyclopedia of Photography declared as its goal, to have answered all the questions anyone is likely to encounter about photography research. Far from that. Instead, I have wanted to underline something that is important and often overlooked. That following Tim Ingold, for example, we can take as the aim of photographic research not only to look at photographs, but to follow them. And as odd as it might sound, to join with the images, trying to dismantle some of our objectifying orientations. This is in no way an invitation to disregard the study of the manifold meanings and applications photographic images have in our lives. Photographs' roles as material supports, as traces or documents, as technical apparatuses. On the contrary, all that needs to be explored. But in addition, we should never cease to look for the new words, languages, and imagination that run alongside photography. Photography, which itself is, as the name suggests, a combination of light and writing. Thank you.